Hi, this is Devoki, and today I am going to be talking about the books that I bought in 2017. So a few months ago I made a video where I talked about book hauls, and kind of my overarching question in the video was why they're so popular in the booktube community, and I was specifically comparing it to the makeup community where, you know, makeup hauls are really popular, but there's also been this recent trend of anti-hauls where people talk about the makeup that they're not gonna buy. And one of the things that I was wondering is kind of why I was taking it for granted that you can't really do anti-hauls in the booktube community, which I think I'm still kind of having some evolving thoughts about, but mostly I still think that's true. I don't think anti-hauls could be as popular in the booktube community for a lot of reasons that I talked about in that video. So a big part of that video though was also me talking about kind of my own interactions with book hauls. I don't really watch them that much, and I also don't make any, or I haven't yet. Maybe people might consider this video a book haul, but a big part of why I don't really do book hauls is I don't buy that many books. I just don't like the idea of buying and owning books that I don't know if I love them. And that's kind of a function of a few things. One is just, you know, budget. I don't have like massive amounts of cash coming in from my, you know, grad student lifestyle. And the other thing is space. I just don't live in a very big apartment. So it's not really about numbers. My goal isn't to have like as few books as possible. In fact, I think my dream kind of like lifetime wise would be to like live in a house where I could just have like a huge room dedicated to all the books I own, like basically have my own personal library. But what I really want is for that to be a library where you could like walk in and you know that like every single book in there is like a book that I love, that I could happily recommend to somebody. So the general approach that I outlined in that video is that I want to buy books that I already know that I love and will want to keep long term. And the most obvious implementation of that is to buy books that I've already read and know that I love so much that I actually want to spend money on them. But of course, it's very easy to talk a big game about how I want to spend my money. It's a very different thing to actually kind of follow through on that. So in this video, I actually kind of want to like hold myself accountable for how I've spent my money this year book-wise, and just talk through like kind of the books that I bought, how I think they hold up against my stated goal, and how I might want to like kind of address my habits in the future. So even though I said in my like haul discussion video that I don't really have any intention of doing book hauls, this might be kind of like my iteration of one. I think this will be a little bit more navel-gazy than one, so even though I am going to go through each of the books that I bought and talk a little bit about them, just know that this is going to be just a lot of kind of like verbalized introspection. One major caveat, and I think this is actually something that is really glaringly missing from my haul discussion video. When I'm talking about buying books, I'm talking strictly about physical books. I'm not talking about ebooks and audiobooks. And I think that's pretty short-sighted on my part. Ebooks and audiobooks, like, I think they're a little bit easier to mindlessly buy because you're just kind of like, you know, this doesn't take up any space. I just press, you know, a button on Amazon and it's instantly downloaded. You can store it in a cloud. But what I've noticed a lot of times is that I'll be traveling and I'll be like, oh, I should just, you know, get a bunch of books, and then I buy a bunch of ebooks and then I don't end up reading them. So I think this is really kind of a short-sighted limitation of the discussion that I'm about to have and that I've had previously. And I think for the upcoming year, it's something that I want to think a little bit more about. So in this video, I'm going to talk just kind of first broadly about my general stats for the year, then I'll get into each of the books that I bought, and then lastly, I'll give an overall summary of kind of my feelings about my reading and shopping habits for the year. Just a note, the numbers that I'm about to get into, they're strictly for my own purposes. I'm using them to kind of frame my reading and shopping habits for the year and just kind of give something that I can analyze against. I'm not judging anyone who buys or reads more or less than I do, and I don't think that you should use these numbers as benchmarks for like good or bad reading / shopping habits. Also a few weeks left in 2017, so there's a chance that I'm going to be buying some more books. I have a list on my Google account that I just kind of keep of books that I want to buy that I've already read and I know that I love, so I might get into that list a little bit later on. So going through my numbers for the year, I bought 21 books this year. 3 of them are international Pride and Prejudices that I bought when I've traveled. 6 of them are books that I had previously read before and knew that I loved. 5 more of them are ones that I bought and then read after buying them. And then there are 7 that I have bought and have yet to read. I'm pretty happy that most of these books have been read, but there are still obviously quite a few books that I have yet to get to. And my goal for, I think, kind of the next month or two is to get through as many of those unread books as possible. So I'm actually putting myself on a temporary library hiatus while I hopefully at least get a few of them finished. So I'm gonna get into the books that I actually bought now, breaking it down into those different categories. And for the books that I've either reviewed in videos or wrap-ups, I will also link to those videos below. So starting off are my international Pride and Prejudices. My husband and I, we have a tradition when we travel where our souvenir is basically a specific book that we buy in the language of that country. My book is Pride and Prejudice, which sometimes is really hard to find and is sometimes a little bit of a struggle, and that happened again this year, but it's okay. We went traveling to Hungary and Greece this year, and so I have this version from Athens, which is the Greek version, and I just really, it's just so pretty. This is my Hungary version, and I love that it has Colin Firth in the white shirt on the cover. And then this is the version from Paris that my husband bought for me when he was there. So I guess technically I didn't buy this book, it was a gift. But this is like one of the few ones that I actually should be able to read because I did take French, but I'm gonna take a wild guess and say that I will not actually be able to read this. So now getting into the books that I think are most in line with my stated goal. These are books that I had previously read before and I knew that I loved and I bought. So the first one is The Thief by Megan Whalen Turner. So this book is part of her Queen's Thief series, which I've talked a lot about before. It's one of my favorite YA series. It's basically kind of a Mediterranean version of like your political and courtly intrigue, but just they're really well crafted. She's really good at building narrative twists, but also really complicated romantic and like platonic relationships. So I've known for a while that this is one of the series that I really want to own, and I was at Brookline Booksmith. I saw that they had a signed copy, so I was like, sure, signed copy sounds good. This is one of those series that I'm definitely planning to own the entirety of in the future. I think I have The Queen of Atolia, I think it's at home, which is the second book, so just a whole bunch more to go. The next book is Gracelean by Kristin Cashore, which is another really awesome YA series. I talked about it really recently in my review for Jade Unlimited, and I bought this book used from Brookline Booksmith. So Brookline Booksmith, I think for a lot of these books is gonna be like coming up a lot because I've started going there a lot more. If you've been to Boston, if you live in Boston, you should really check out this bookstore. They have an amazing used book section, which is where I got this from, and yeah. So this book is part of her Gracelean Realms trilogy, which is this fantasy story set in this world where basically people have graces or kind of like these superpowers of sort, and this book is set around Katsa, who is the king's niece, and she's basically been told that her grace is killing, and she's basically used for that. The book examines kind of that power that she has, but also how it's used by others and how she's wielded by others. It's just really good. I think the whole trilogy is great if you want a really thoughtful breakdown of tropes around fantasy and women. I'm planning to own this whole series in the future. Luckily, this one is only 3 books total, so I think that will happen a lot sooner than the Queen's Thief series. Speaking of Kristin Cashore, I also just bought Jade Unlimited, which I just reviewed and said was one of my favorite books of 2017. This is also an amazing YA book. This is standalone. It's not part of a trilogy as far as I know. It would be interesting if it were. I don't think it would work. This is almost like a choose your own adventure novel, but where all of the adventures have been chosen. It's about this girl named Jane who's really at this kind of transition point in her life. She's really at a crossroads, but she doesn't even know what the options are. And she goes and visits her friend's house called like Tout Revient. Like her friend is one of those people who lives in a house that has a name. And this house turns out to be filled with people and secrets that are just confounding and intersect in really interesting ways. So I really will continue talking about this book for a while, so I don't want to get too much into it because it's gonna keep popping up, but I loved it so much, I bought it. This is also from Brookline Booksmith, also a signed copy. I don't know. I just love it. Next book is Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. This is one of my favorite thrillers, and I just have known that I'm gonna own this at some point because I love it. I think it's just such an amazing like breakdown of what it would be like to be as villainous of a woman as people make out women to be. I'm just so impressed with how Gillian Flynn worked up to this novel. I had read all of her books up until this point, and then this one still somehow completely blew me away. I also bought this one used at Brookline Booksmith. Also from Brookline Booksmith, The Vegetarian by Hong Kong. I actually just bought this book last week. I think when I went to go buy Jane Unlimited, I saw this in their sale section and was like, yes, give it to me. I was really surprised by how much I liked this book. This book is about a young woman in Korea who decides to become a vegetarian, and that decision opens up a whole can of worms about like how her family and just kind of society in general has been interacting with her and trying to control her body. A big part of why I was surprised by how much I like this book is just because it was so acclaimed. I've never been a huge literary fiction person, and I think this is the first book that kind of made me understand the genre a little bit more and be more intrigued by it. And the last book, this is actually like from very early on in my channel. This is The Making of Asian America by Erica J. Lee. This is one of my favorite books of last year, and this is one of those books that I talk about so much with people. This is a history of immigration from Asia to America. When I first started this book, I was really skeptical that she was going to be able to take on Asia, which is huge and immense and has a very complicated history, but she really did a great job. I think she does an amazing job of being able to explain why different people's experiences immigrating to the US is so different from each other's, but also similar. This book really gave me a sense of personal history that I think a lot of first-generation Americans, we have a hard time finding because we have so many different sources of origin that seem so contradictory. So I love this book. I bought this off of Amazon. I don't know. I think I should have bought 10 more because I'm always recommending it to everyone, and I think I just at this point kind of just want to give it to everyone to read. So the next two categories are going to be books that I bought before reading them, and I think in the long term I do want to kind of minimize this category a little bit more, but I don't feel too bad about it yet because I think I was pretty thoughtful about why I bought these books most of the time. Not all of the time, there's a few where I wasn't, but I don't have major regrets yet. So breaking that down even further, the first subcategory are going to be the books that I did end up reading after I bought them, at least that I've read yet. The first is Antony and Cleopatra by William Shakespeare. I bought this book because Crystal Marsh recommended this to me. I think I was traveling, so I was just like, you know what, I want to have a copy of this while I'm on the plane, and I actually did start reading it while I'm traveling, which is sometimes rare. I always buy books before I travel and then end up not reading them because I'm on the plane and just end up catching up on all the movies instead. But anyways, I did actually start reading this. This was really different for me. I think I've read a lot of kind of this, the high school standards when it comes to Shakespeare, like Hamlet, Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet. So this was a very different read for me. I think it assumed so much more knowledge than a lot of those plays do, which is probably why those are the ones that are taught in high school. So this was fascinating, and I definitely want to read it again with more of a sense of what's actually kind of happening outside of the play itself. I really love Cleopatra, and I loved her attendants in particular. They're just hysterical, but also incredibly tragic. Maybe I shouldn't laugh while saying that. The next book is Unfuck Your Habitat by Rachel Hoffman. This book is great. So I've been following Unfuck Your Habitat and Rachel kind of online for a while, and so I was really excited for this book to come out. I bought this basically to support the site. If you haven't checked out Unfuck Your Habitat and it sounds like something that would be helpful if you sound especially with the upcoming new year, you need some help kind of organizing your space. I think the kind of Unfuck Your Habitat mentality is really great for holding yourself accountable while also being understanding of why you might not always be able to clean, whether it's mental health or timing or just physical health. There's a lot of factors, but there's so much great practical advice for dealing with those factors. I'm glad I have this book. I'm definitely going to need to reread it for the upcoming year to get a refresher. The next two books, I'm just combining them here because my review of them is also a combined review. These are Science Blogging and Better Presentations, which I bought both of these from MIT Press. And these are really great resources if you're thinking about science communication, if you're thinking about how to talk about your work in different kind of contexts. So Better Presentations is oriented around PowerPoint presentations, and I think it's a really great kind of beginner's visual guide to things like colors or fonts or data presentation. I think it's just really nice and easy to read. It's also very pretty, so effectively done. And Science Blogging is a collection of essays from different science writers and bloggers, and I think it gives kind of an overall sense of science blogging that is helpful to have as a resource. Part of the reason that I bought these books is because they weren't available at my library, which I think is actually kind of going to be a recurring theme in a lot of these books that I bought before reading them. So I just want to keep that in mind because I think that's something that will also come up at the end of this video when I talk about my overall reading and buying habits. My last book for this category is Superficial by Andy Cohen. Darwin. So I did not like intend to buy this book. It was more that he was doing his book tour, and part of going to the event that was being held in Boston for him involved getting the signed copy of this book. I actually didn't end up reading this. I ended up listening to it on audiobook from the library, so this is a weird combination of habits. So Superficial covers a year of Andy Cohen's diaries. He's in charge of a lot of like the Bravo programming that someone like me holds near and dear, like the Real Housewives franchise. So it's just kind of gossipy and fun. I think one of the things for me in terms of kind of like my overall goals is that this is not a book that I would have bought if I hadn't gone to the event. I would have just checked it out from the library because it's not something that I feel like I have to own. But I think like owning it in this case is kind of fun for me because I did go to the event, so it's kind of like a nice memento. And now on to the last category. These are books that I have yet to read. First is On the Origin of Species by Charles Darwin. So this is Darwin's like seminal work about evolution, and I bought this book because I've been wanting to read it, but I also don't quite know why I bought it. I do like the cover. One of the things that kind of bothers me about this edition specifically is that it's pretty small, like it's really small and thick. So it's I guess kind of convenient to hold on to, like it's easy to throw into a purse, but it's just like, I don't know, it's just like physically kind of annoying to read. I kind of wish I had just checked this out from the library, but I'm also not mad about owning it because I do want to finish reading it. And it is such a seminal work that I feel like it's pretty solid to have it like in my collection of books. I bought this off of Amazon, so I didn't know the dimensions of this book when I bought it. I just saw that the cover was really pretty, and I guess that's a reason to buy a book, not a great one. Next up is Sarah Waters' Tipping the Velvet. So Sarah Waters wrote Fingersmith, which was a book that I really loved last year. And I think Tipping the Velvet is like pretty similar. I think it's sort of her standard lesbian historical fiction, sort of now cast in a Dickens coming of age story from what I understand. I bought this used at Brookline Booksmith, basically, I think is what happened. So I feel pretty good about owning it because I kind of trust Sarah Waters and I feel like this is gonna be good. If I finish it and don't like it, I will be kind of annoyed at myself for having bought it. So the next up is The Scientific Literature, A Guided Tour, and this is edited by Joseph E. Harmon and Alan G. Gross. So this is kind of, I think, like an academic overview about how scientific literature, like science discourse and science writing, has changed over the years. And I bought this because I've been kind of increasingly interested in this subject, so I asked someone who has a lot of expertise in this area for a recommendation on something to read, and he suggested this book. The reason why I bought this is because the copy at my library can't be taken out of the library, so this like fully is in line with kind of the category of books that I bought because I can't get them. Sorry, my cat. So this is like in line with the category of books that I bought because I couldn't get them from the library. I think the other reason why I'm glad that I have a physical copy of this book is because it'll be easier to take notes and highlight in when I get a chance to read it. I think this is one of those books though that I kind of want to sit down and study, so that's probably part of why I haven't been reading it yet. Next up is The Gene by Siddhartha Mukherjee. I have been reading this book for 6 months, and every time I read it, I am so happy that I'm reading it, and then I put it down and I just don't pick it up again. This is an overview of the history of research about genes and kind of the scientific understanding of genes, and it's really cast against Mukherjee's own family history, which coincides with a lot of Indian history as well. I really love Mukherjee's writing. I think he does a really wonderful job tying history and science and personal narratives together, so I will finish this book. Last up, I think, for my massive nonfiction is Hamilton by Ron Chernow. It's a history of Alexander Hamilton. We all know it at this point. I watched the musical and I just like, I think at this point I own every single version of this book. Like I have this physical book, I have the ebook, I have the audiobook, I have the cast album on my phone. My husband has the vinyl of the cast album of the show. Like, all of the forms of Hamilton and this book, like that you can own short of actually owning the musical theater company, I probably own some form of. This I got from a library sale for $1. I feel good about owning it. I don't feel good about the fact that I still haven't read it. So that's something that's going to happen. Okay, this was like pure indulgence and I feel guilty for admitting this. This book is Making Faces by Kevin Aquan. It's like a classic, I think, in the beauty community. I bought this because I wanted Prime same-day shipping for something, and this was like something I could add on to meet the minimum spending requirement you need for that, and that's why I bought it. It's beautiful, like, to look at, like, just all of these different types of makeup and guides to doing makeup that I should read, but I haven't yet. And last, this is the book that I'm reading right now. This is The Tiger's Daughter by Kate Arsenal Rivera. This was a book that I also bought because it wasn't at the library yet. This is as far as I can tell so far, this is kind of a combination of Mongolian and Japanese inspired fantasy brought together by these two women from these different cultures who are warriors. I think they go on to fight demons, I think, based on the summary. I think they're in love with each other too. Basically, when I heard about this book, I was almost skeptical because it sounded too good to be true, but I started reading it and I love the writing so far, so I'm optimistic, but I have a long way to go. Like, I'm here and there's all these pages left, so if it turns out to like end in a way that I'm unhappy with, I'm gonna be really disappointed on multiple levels, but so far I'm loving it. So those are all of the books that I bought this year. So like I said, I have a list of books on on Google that like I can easily access when I'm at a bookstore, which really helps me keep in control and just avoid buying all the books that I want to buy, because like it's so easy. Like, they're all so pretty and they all like have the potential to be so good. Keeping in mind this philosophy has just been something that's helped me a lot. Like, I noticed it even last week when I was at Brookline Booksmith picking up Jane Unlimited. I was like, oh, but all these books, I want to read them, and if I just buy them now, I won't have to wait for them from the library. But doing that, avoiding that, has been really good for me. A lot of books that I like wanted to read and was like tempted to buy from the bookstore, but then I checked them out from the library. Maybe I didn't enjoy them that much, or maybe I did enjoy them, just not enough to like really justify spending money on it for my budget and my goals. I just want to end this video with some overall thoughts just kind of on those habits. I think especially for me, getting like into booktube, getting like following like book people on Instagram and Twitter, I think that my approach has been really helpful for me. I've seen a lot of videos like, you know, on whether or not booktube is too expensive, sometimes feeling a lot of pressure to read or to own a lot of books. And I think for me, having this kind of like guiding philosophy of how I want to spend my money when it comes to books helps mitigate some of those issues. If I bought even like half of the books that sounded good on booktube or, you know, the rest of the internet, I would both have like no money, but I think just owning all of those books would give me a sense of pressure that I need to read them, because I spent all that money. Now, like, what am I doing not reading it? I mean, it's something that I see in like other kind of consumption habits like clothes or makeup, where if I buy a lot of them, like a lot of these things, and then I don't use them, you feel really guilty about it, and that can create a sense of pressure that actually becomes kind of unproductive in the long term, because now you're just thinking more about why you're not using these things instead of actually like enjoying them. But what I should also acknowledge is that my kind of reading / spending habits that I'm describing in this video are possible because I'm lucky to live in a particularly bookish city that has an expansive library system, and that really makes it easy for me to access a lot of books. Not all libraries have the same resources, and not all would-be patrons do either. And I want to include this caveat because I think it's really important to consider when we're talking about like spending habits and reading habits. I know there's also a huge conversation on Twitter recently about book pirating, and I want to say, like, as someone like me who can't or maybe doesn't want to spend a ton of money on books, I think it's really important to take advantage of this access to my library, both to actually engage with it, but also because it's an easy and free way to support authors. It may not be like as much money in their wallet as it would be if I bought the book, but it is something that shows support for the author. It's something that helps their circulation numbers. It's something that helps them downstream with getting more libraries to access their book. And one thing that I'm really coming to appreciate is how essential the library is to my reading habits, not just in terms of like making reading possible, but also kind of giving me a framework that's both like adds a sense of urgency to reading, but also creates like a low pressure environment that lets me be adventurous. So what I mean by that is, like, when it comes to the library, you have a due date, right? Like you know that you have to read this book by a certain date. And I think that creates enough of a sense of urgency that I actually get to reading the book that's hard to duplicate with the book if you just like own it, because you know you could read it at any time. And I think that just helps motivate me, or at least think about, you know, do I actually want to read this book? Meanwhile, on the other side, like, the library is also incredibly low pressure. Like, if I don't like a book or if I don't read it, I can just return it. In fact, I have to return it. It's whether or not I like it, it's kind of a part of the deal. And I think this combination of like a low stakes urgency has made me more comfortable exploring genres and books and authors that I'm less familiar with, which I think has made me a stronger reader and hopefully a more interesting booktuber over the past year than I would have been otherwise. So again, this was a very navel-gazy haul. I hope it was enjoyable for you guys. Let me know down below if you kind of changed and refined your book budgeting habits over the year, either in terms of like cost or just like how you acquire them. I'm really interested to hear that. Yeah, thank you guys for watching, and bye.